Hi there, and welcome to my video. Today I'm going to be taking you through how I made this painting of two tigers called Tiger Tango in this exotic scene. As always, I'm going to take you through the thought process, how I came up with the idea, what was my intentions and approach, and the techniques I used to create this piece. Thanks for joining me. I hope you get something out of this video. So for as long as I can remember, I have always been interested in old signs and vintage labels and any kind of colorful, interesting imagery that you might see on fruit containers or cans or just all types of different advertising. This is a Pinterest collection that I have that I just keep adding to of some of these old like Matchbox covers and different labels, and almost all of them include some type of animal. And I've always wanted to paint something inspired by this imagery, but I just have never done it. So I figured I would give it a try. The first thing I did was collect up a few of the different labels. I decided pretty quickly that I wanted to include tigers in the imagery, and so I took that into Photoshop and mocked up a simple layout using various elements from some of these old labels. I've also been painting a lot of tiki heads, and I took one of the images that I had painted of the Stardust Tiki statue and included that. I wanted the scene to be really exotic and sort of transport you to a different world. Now, I had this older painting that I had done that was also an experiment, and it was some abstract faces with these golden scarabs crawling over them, and I just really wasn't happy with where that exercise ended. I know some people, might question why I would paint over my older work, but I think as an artist, you get to a place where you're just cranking out a lot of different work, and you're going to end up with pieces that just don't turn out or you aren't satisfied with. And I know for sure I could do a better job with that subject matter. So I felt really good about just covering it up and doing something completely different. And it was actually kind of cathartic and kind of nice. So what I'm doing here is basically taking my concept art and overlaying it on top of a photo of this older painting that I'm going to be covering up. And I'm just using that top layer of my illustration as a transparency to create sort of a doodle grid, if you will. So I can use the original image on the background, the blue faces and the bug. I can use reference points on that original artwork to help me place the elements that I want to paint in this new painting. So if that makes sense, there's a whole video I did on doodle grids, and there's a bunch of examples out there of how those work. So once I got those general shapes down, I just started working on the background, working on the sky, using a little bit of a blending medium with this acrylic paint to try to just create a nice sort of a mushy, exotic sunset. I wanted to mention here that I'm actually traveling when I was painting this, so I'm not in my normal studio space. But I brought supplies with me. I was going to be out of town for a few weeks, and I'm really glad that I did. Later in the video, I'll be back in my studio finishing this up, so the camera angle will shift, and hopefully you'll get a better overhead view of the work in progress. But yeah, I'm just at this point referencing the different labels that I had sampled, and also just trying to make them my own, right? Not just copying them straight, but trying to use my imagination and just capture the feeling, the old vintage vibe, and the illustrative techniques that were used in those prints. I was really excited with how this is coming along, honestly, right from the start. A lot of times with paintings, there's a part where it gets really messy, or it often feels like you're not quite sure how it's going to turn out. You just have to trust the process. I've said that 1,000 times, but you have to trust the process and push through. And I know that all you guys that are artists and painters know what I'm talking about. But this one felt pretty good from the beginning. I was a little bit unsure of how the sky was going to look as I started to add the foreground elements, but I really do feel like it came together pretty well. Now, I'd already painted this Stardust Tiki, and I call it the Stardust Tiki because I think it's was at a hotel in Las Vegas called the Stardust Hotel and Casino. I'm not quite sure about the name, but I think that's where the photos that I had seen, old photos from that, location had this tiki head in it, and some of the advertisements advertising the hotel and casino or resort or whatever it is had these really great illustrations of that, and they kind of inspired me. I always kind of struggle when I'm making these videos, wondering what people want to know. So it really helps if you all put questions and comments below, and that way I don't have to try to figure out while I'm writing the scripts or just doing the voiceover what you actually care about. I can just respond to the comments and give you more details, or make future videos to answer questions that you might have. I learn from you guys as well. There's nothing really super special about what I'm doing here. I'm basically just filling in, almost like color by number, just filling in the shapes, blocking in the big parts. After the background, was coming together, I just felt like I had a pretty good momentum, and so here I'm just trying to slowly work on adding the tigers, adding the plant foliage, alternating between just different brushes to try to get different effects, right? Like for the tigers, I was using like a round, I think, and flats, like larger brushes, and obviously for this foliage, I'm using much thinner brushes, liner brushes, basically. So yeah, just continue working on, alternating between blocking in the big shapes and then, starting to work on some of the details and just having fun with it. I was really, really excited to paint these tigers, and we're going to be back in the studio here in a second. And as I paint the tiger stripes and everything, it's a really satisfying part of the painting, I think, to watch. So yeah, we're back now in Atlanta, back home in the studio, and I decided to go ahead and put in this red sort of decorative graphic border that I had planned to put in from the start, sort of like a frame, frame element on the actual painting, and kind of give it that design feel. I'm not going to add any words to this painting. I'm not going to make it feel like an actual label. Although I think that's something I might do in the future. I think that's really kind of interesting, to the interplay of, font typography on top of illustration. I could see this, saying something really funny or interesting or whatever. So let me know if you guys have thoughts on that. I've seen a lot of people using text in their paintings recently, and I think it's kind of cool. So I'm not quite sure if this theme is Chinese or some other culture, but I've seen this design motif. It might even be Greek. And I think the one thing I wanted to say here is that I had a dilemma, because I wanted to originally make this almost feel, really mechanical and really perfect. And I got a little bit impatient, and I'm actually glad I did, because I would have drove myself crazy, like trying to make these rectangles and lines absolutely perfect. And this isn't a computer, process. This is a handmade painting. So I really ended up enjoying the effect that I got from just doing it by hand. I don't even know if there's an even number of these little elements on either side, and I don't care to. In the future, if I do this again and I want to make it perfect, I can always do that. So here I'm basically going in with, I think this is like a nickel, azo nickel. It's a transparent paint, and using that as well as some titanium white, mixing together and just trying to build up some shadows and depth to these tigers. So here comes what I think is really the super fun part. And again, I didn't want to try to be too meticulous with adding these stripes. I started out trying to make them almost perfect and exact, but they're organic, right? They're just part of, any number of tigers. I assume just like fingerprints, like, the stripes are all different. And there's really no reason for me to try to stress myself out trying to make these look exactly like the reference material. So I just, used my intuition, did my best, and had fun with it. Um, I started out using again the nickel azo gold transparently just to kind of get the stripes in place, and then I end up going back with a little bit of carbon black mixed in to add more contrast and really push the effect. So I think the reason I ended up choosing tigers to focus on is kind of related to the reason why I'm drawn to these types of imagery in the first place. And I think it has to do with growing up as a kid and looking at scenes on things like oranges and lemons and just different advertising that as a kid kind of captured my imagination and took me into another world. Art for me, a lot of art for me is about escaping and daydreaming and living in the world inside your mind. So there's another theme or two going on here that I really don't necessarily need to go into detail about, but let's just say that there's something deeper, right, going on with two tigers that are almost mirror images of each other facing off against each other. It's almost like a statement on battling your own self image or um, overcoming a fear that is maybe coming from inside. I don't know. It's deeper than just a picture of two tigers playing around or fighting in an exotic landscape. But like I said, I don't want to go into too much detail there, and I kind of like, for now at least, with some of my art, leaving it open to interpretation to the viewer. If nothing else, if it's just a striking image that captures someone's attention and um, you know gets their imagination going, that's really all that's all it needs to do. I ended up adding some um, overlapping foliage. I wanted to do that from the beginning. I like this idea of playing with depth and breaking planes, and having the image sort of framed uh, with this graphic element, but then having some of the elements overlapping on top of that frame. I just really like the idea of that just gives it a little more interest to me. But I will say it's a little bit nerve wracking, and I've talked about this in my other videos too, where I'm at this point with my painting where I'm battling against not trying to mess something up, versus pushing beyond that and getting over that fear and taking chances and experimenting. And I really think that the more I push through that hesitation and that fear when things feel like they're just good enough, once I push past that is when the magic, if you will, starts to happen. So I'd like to mention that here because I think that as other people are on this journey and are doing artwork, I think we probably all battle with that same issue, right? Where you get to a point where you feel like things are looking really good and you don't want to mess them up, but sometimes, often, there's you can elevate your art by pushing past that, and likewise, if you give into that and that tendency to be hesitant and to try not to mess things up, some of that hesitation may show up in the piece. So that's what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to finish the piece and trying to really add in some nice touches and details and not worry about screwing things up at this point. I think the other thing is the more and more I paint, the more comfortable I get, the more confident I am that I'm not going to mess things up, and I really can push things forward and go for it. So just a few final thoughts here. I ended up adding a little UFO, and it's not just because UAPs are in the news these days. I've always had a fascination with otherworldly, right, mysterious things. Not always just alien phenomena, but other stuff as well. And I think it just, I had a little bit of an empty sky here, and I think it was a nice, interesting touch to just add one more element to really push this image and this space that I'm trying to capture, this world, into an even a more exotic place. And then just a lot of little final touch-ups, to clean it all up. I always varnish my pieces. I use an isolation coat first, and then I end up varnishing on top of that. with an acrylic varnish, and I'm I'm trying this out in an antique frame. It turns out that the wood panel was too deep to fit inside of the frame, but I tried it anyway just to see how it would look, and I painted the edges so that this piece could hang without a frame. And as you can see here, I did end up placing it into an antique market, and ended up selling it pretty much immediately. So I'm really glad that someone was attracted to it, and I hope that they're enjoying this piece. And I'm looking forward to doing another one of these. So let me know what you think. As always, thank you for your time. Peace.